My name is Hisayasu Ihara, and I am from Kyushu University, Japan. It is great honor to be invited to this symposium. I want to thank the Symbol Group for giving me this opportunity. My presentation explores the variety of pictograms used long before the publications of Dreyfuss Symbol Sourcebook, focusing on the rarely discussed North American animated film pictograms produced during the 1940s. Pictograms have been used in various ways, including in pictorial statistics presented by isotype. Especially during the 1930s and 1940s, the genre of expression related to pictograms expanded greatly. One expansion was the development of animated pictograms on film. Although isotype animation is well known as animated pictograms on film, few know that films using animated pictograms were also produced in North America during the same period. One leading animator was the architect Philip E. Ragan, who began creating pictorial statistics in the 1930s under the influence of isotype. During the Second World War, he produced over 30 animation films for the National Film Board of Canada, NFB. Ragan was probably the first animator or designer to comprehensively use animated pictograms. Because I have previously written an overview of Ragan's work, here I attempt to summarize the characteristic of his work produced for the NFB in terms of pictograms and animation. Next, I explore attempts at animated pictograms in other documentary films and animations during the same period. Through these surveys, the possibility of pictogram animation will be discussed. Regarding terminology, until the late 1970s, when the term pictogram came into common use, the word symbol was used. Nevertheless, this presentation adopts pictogram because symbol is often used differently in animation, frequently in psychological meaning. So even though it is an anachronism, I decided to use pictogram. In the 1930s, many designers created pictorial statistics chart influenced by isotype, which was then becoming known in the United States. Among them, Philip Ragan, who founded and played a central role in the group Sociographic Philadelphia, stood out for his unique pictogram design style. Ragan graduated from the University of Pennsylvania School of Architecture. Ragan's name did not appear in publications until shortly after his graduate in 1934. His first designed chart in special issue of Pennsylvania Department of Labor and Industry Bulletin in July 1934. And since then, he has regularly designed this bulletin. Around 1937, he began designing charts for Works Progress Administration, WPA publication. For instance, the illustration for The Right to Work by WPA Administrator Nels Anderson. After 1940, he intermittently designed chart for Fortune magazine. In addition to these graphic works, Ragan seems to have began experimenting with animation using pictograms around 1937. This experiment was a cut-art technique in which objects and figures were to be cut from bakelite and animated mechanically instead of by drawing separate pictures for each motion of the object. In 1941, Ragan contracted with the NFB to produce propaganda films. Why Ragan, who had minimal experience in film production, was hired remains unclear. In any case, Ragan began producing animation in earnest in 1941. Money, Good, and Prices is an essential film because Ragan appeared in the film to explain his animation's benefits based on the use of pictograms. So here I shall show this film a little longer.
The story of economic stabilization deals with relationships that cannot be photographed realistically. It is impossible to take a picture of the flow of money or of the effect of war on the exchange of goods and money. However, the animated film technique can picture these things simply and clearly. The symbols used in this film, while based on realism, are the result of a careful elimination of non-essential details. What each represents is apparent at a glance. For instance, this is a house. It isn't your house or mine. It is the house of everyone in Canada. This factory is all factories. This store, all stores. This barn, every barn. This office building, all office buildings. And now with this equipment, we will photograph Canada's peacetime economy and show how it works.
You can watch Ragan's 19 animation films on this site of the NFB. Please visit after my presentation. The first film produced was Control for Victory, which illustrates the need for government price controls. Importantly, it contains scenes showing continuity with Ragan's experience designing pictorial diagrams for printed material in the 1930s. The film consists of two parts. The first part consists of static pictograms representing a factory, a store, and a government agency in white on a black background. Pictograms represent workers and products moving among these facilities. The overall design seems to have been based on pictorial diagrams in publications such as 1 Year of WPA in Pennsylvania, as you can see. Just the second part differs in style with a white background with identifiable pictograms of workers and dramatic content. For instance, scene of workers competing for dwindling consumer goods. Since then, Ragan's animations generally mixed these two types with their differences in discourse formulated as conceptual or narrative. In narrative discourse, pictograms play the leading role in detailed movement. In conceptual discourse, abstract relationship among pictograms play the leading role. Narrative discourses often include the character Praga, who had a wife, a son Johnny, and a daughter Jenny. Although Praga became a popular character, his shape was appropriated almost directly from the sociographic Philadelphia symbol, which depicts a man in profile with his legs spread wide and wearing a bird striped cap to represent a worker. In addition, the pictograms of Praga are identical to those of workers who are devoid of individuality. Pictogram characters' eyes, nose, and mouth necessary for expressing emotions are omitted, so that as compared with standard animation, these characters use exclusively exaggerated gestures to express intimation, disappointment, anger, and so on.
That showed the purchases they planned to make after evening. Plugger was sauntering along when a display of fishing equipment caught his eye. Just as he was about to succumb to temptation, Plugger ran smack into Johnny. Plugger gave the boy a severe scolding. Then stalked off, highly concerned about the lad and
as a conceptual expression, a recurring and representative theme in Lagan's film is economic events, especially inflation and its suppression, which has increased since 1943. In the background are pictograms of organization or facilities such as houses, factories, stores, and government agencies, and they compose a conceptual dialogue representing their relationship.
To prevent shortages, the government must plan to divide the goods in such a way that everyone is assured a fair share of the available goods. Supply in wartime flows in two directions. It must meet the imperative needs of war, and it must provide a fair share of essential goods for you at home. Providing goods for you means planning for Canada's many stores.
Lagan's film had two types of discourse, narrative and conceptual. Lagan focused on the latter, visualization of economic institutions. On the other hand, Lagan's entry into animation seems to have inevitably involved him in a competitive state of expression unique to the field. Lagan had demonstrated his strengths in unparalleled animation expression using pictograms, but similar attempts began to appear during the war. Around 1944, in addition to a few quirky ideas, Lagan began producing works that incorporated live action as well as animation. And this seems to express his growing awareness of pictograms' limitation in animation. Spread of animated pictograms on film in North America. World War II, which prompted Lagan to begin animation production in earnest, was a difficult time for the North American animation industry, but also a time when propaganda training and educational film were in demand. Many animated films were produced under these circumstances. Therefore, we searched for animations containing pictograms from the works of leading North American production company and institutions. There were Walt Disney Studio, United Productions of America, UPA, and NFB. In last, NFB is omitted in this presentation. Here we summarize the result of this survey under two themes: animation with pictograms on maps and animation with pictograms representing human figures. Animation with pictograms on maps. UPA was an animation studio founded in 1941 by animators laid off following a strike at Disney Studio. John Habley, one of the main founders, described the wartime situation and animation need for a new language. According to Habley, this language was sought at the intersection of two opposing methods: the funny but unrealistic method represented by Disney, and the cool and abstract method for information graphics, such as charts, map, and diagram for educational or training purposes. In UPA's work, which sought a direction different from Disney's, animated expression using pictograms can also be found, although not so many. Bullet and Lend-Lease from a few quick facts series are typical examples. In the former, pictograms partially depict the complex, time-consuming path of weapons delivery to the front lines, as you can see in these shots. The film Lend-Lease began with the allegorical scene in which our neighbor's house catches fire and the flames descend on our house. The need for the law for the global situation is explained using house fire metaphor, saying that a hose for entire yard is required to extinguish the fire in the neighbor's house.
Help plug the gas.
Boldly omitted backgrounds and objects depicted in this scene are drawn in the UPA's distinctive style, but in the scene's latter half, where supplies are Lend-Lease on the map, line drawings that could be considered pictograms appear.
Time to move them overseas. The United States hurried men to the Southwest Pacific, and through reverse Lend-Lease, Australia and New Zealand furnished them with clothes, and shoes, hospitals, food. We sent our allies what they...
Walt Disney Studio produced many propaganda and training animations commissioned by the armed force. Almost all works identified as animations with accompanied pictograms were map-based animations. They were also used in documentary films, for example, in the Why We Fight series, commissioned by Frank Capra, or full-color animations with pictograms are used extensively in the 1940s film Two Down, One to Go. The map designs above have a common general orientation towards realism. With the horizon drawn spherically, the pictograms themselves are sometimes drawn in three dimensions. The general public was expected to view international affairs from a global perspective, and animations depict map gave films this perspective. In these maps, pictograms representing supplies, weapons, and soldiers became the movement mainstay. This affinity between strategic maps and pictograms reminds us of Otto Neurath's reference to old military maps as a representative historical resource for isotype. However, Neurath never incorporated spherical surfaces like the globe into his graphic system. As for animation with pictograms representing human figures, we found very few films, including one documentary film, Tuesday in November, which include animation part for promoting fair presidential elections during wartime. Directed by John Habley, this film's animation used pictograms to explain the elections mechanics. The animation's background is monotone and blank. Except for the president who wears glasses, the human figures have no eyes or noses. They are impersonal figures, all of the same shape with suspended circular heads and angular bodies, a typical pictogram shape. In contrast, in the setting depiction, the desk and council chambers, the depths expressed by inverted perspective, characteristics of a mid-century style, and the figures' irregular, distorted, and geometric shapes highlight differences from rational figures by Ragan. A remarkable film different from those introduced so far was conceived in 1943, but not completed. An educational film for basic English conceived by I.A. Richards and produced by Walt Disney Studios. A British literary scholar, Richards had experience teaching English in China during the 1930s, and his experience there led to a strong interest in language oriented towards the universal. Richards' empiricist view of language required richly illustrated materials for learning the language. In 1942, he published the four-part United States and Canada series titled Learning the English Language. These instruction books were designed by Pictograph Corporation, headed by Rudolf Moderey. In addition to these books, Richards received funding from the Rockefeller Foundation to visit Disney Studio in the summer of 1942 to study drawing, eventually leading to Disney Studio production of animation materials for basic English. This plot-type general picture can be observed in magazine sketches and other publications. The human figure with circular heads floating in mid-air clearly refers to Pictograph Corporation pictograms, whose design style, silhouette of male and female bodies can also be confirmed. The sketches figure mixed silhouette and line drawing, but the line drawing form is unique. The background is not drawn and the shading is minimal, a style expression rarely seen in Disney's animation. Judging from these sketches, the style is somewhat unstable, oscillating between line drawings and silhouettes. Since Richards wanted supranational, non-rational, and universal figures, he seemed dissatisfied with Disney's pictogram. The textbook of basic English published later used so-called stick figures. If Richards produced animation for learning basic English, it might choose stick figures representing human figures. The previous section briefly surveys animated film pictograms from the 1940s, but no works that can be called pure pictogram animations comparable to Ragan's attempt has been found. Among the selected films, many featured pictograms used in maps, partly because of the wartime situation, but also because, as Neurat pointed out, battle map with pictograms have long been used as a means of expression. Ragan created the character of Praga, but no other comparable example was found. The closest is again pictograms representing human figures in Tuesdays in November. But the pictogram itself does not have much movement. The pictogram represents, in principle, a non-individual ordinary person. Therefore, pictogram figures usually represent faceless collective entities, such as soldiers and workers. Pictograms are rendered as static entities. If there is movement, it is somewhat mechanical. A pictogram more likely indicates a static existence in the animation of the same period, which was highly developed as a technique to breathe life into an object. Thus, Ragan's Praga resembles a mechanical robot, suggests that the pictogram is falling to motion in animation at this period. Can pictogram animation be a genre? Ragan's work constructed a unique world using characteristic pictogram. However, there was no other animation comparable to his work. This result suggests that the genre pictogram animation might be difficult to establish. Even if it were, it should be considered a separate movement from the standardization of pictograms. Since the 1940s, several animated pictograms have been seen in films, but whether this can be considered the evolution of pictogram animation is a subject for the further study. About possible connection with standardization pictograms. Regarding the direction of moving image teaching for basic English, the use of moving pictograms as language-like unit for indicating the meaning of the language was a unique trial, though it was never realized. A relationship between it and the contemporary movement of standardized pictograms can be suggested. As an example showing this relationship, the motion pictogram prototype by Martin Krampen is an interesting case study. Krampen actively conducted research during the rise of pictograms in the 1960s and 70s. In his book, The World of Signs, he recollected post-isotype pictograms and attempted to classify them semantically. In this classification, he attempted to create dynamic expressions using animation for verbs in language, such as give and get, while also referring to the classification of basic English. Here we found a commonality with Ragan's interest, Richard's interest in visualization for an attitude toward standards and universality. Reconsidering the role of pictogram animation in supporting language, communication would be significant future challenge. Thank you for listening.